Order.
Oh, nice.
Okay, I'm going to be saying the opening prayer, the Lord's Prayer, in my language, and wishing all you guys make a good decision on behalf of the people and all the hard work that you guys are doing here. Ko be chu darn so bisita kentina. No kai getting die, klein the guys at in the neck order, no neither ni the yak no that on kissing, doing an that on in there. But odds in it Donald to again I don't again no anil chu or isn't on a hustle no nothing there, no one on le, no sneas no anything, no one on let abstine in there. Net anethe the Mari cannot sananakan, net the bush arms, a quinnet anante, scissors ne chine there, catinilante, the guy Mari die upon a lin, no jolly no by an ski. Anet ithani de with azen a kehot in the mercy and the sun call be sure turn some visit argentina. Sick.
Please be seated. Minister statements. Minister of Justice.
Mr. Speaker, it's my honor to announce the establishment of the Bobby Hamilton Memorial Award for Outstanding Community Achievement. The Department of Justice is establishing this award to recognize individuals who demonstrate the principles that Bobby embraced in her daily life. Bobby Hamilton was a dedicated and respected community justice coordinator in Hay River for 15 years, during which time she worked with hundreds of youth and adults in the community justice program. Sadly, Bobby passed in November of last year. She leaves a legacy of championing restorative justice, helping others, and making her community a better place to live. Bobby said that what she loved most about her job as a community justice coordinator was helping others make positive choices, and she had a knack for it. All it takes is one person to help somebody change the course of their life, and Bobby was that one person for many of the clients she worked with. She shared a story about a youth who was in trouble with the law and making their way through the community justice program's restorative justice process. The youth successfully completed the program, but they kept coming back to Bobby's office, not because they were in trouble again, but just to talk or hang out and do homework. The youth eventually went on to university, but continued to visit Bobby years later. I don't think this was an unusual situation for Bobby. That is the kind of person she was. The first time you met her, you would swear you had been friends for years. Outside of work, Bobby was a tireless volunteer in her community and dedicated time to her church, minor and old-timer hockey, youth sporting events, and wherever else she was needed. She cared deeply about her community, and we cared deeply for her. It's no surprise that the Department of Justice chose to name the award for Outstanding Community Achievement after Bobby. The award is open to individuals working in the areas of restorative justice and survivor supports, and those who make contributions to community safety. Considerations include years of service, work promoting peaceful conflict resolution and healing between offenders, victims, families, and the community, and leadership in community justice and collaboration with community partners and organizations. The Bobby Hamilton Award for Outstanding Community Achievement will be open for nominations for next year. It will be awarded at the annual Community Justice Symposium, and the winner will be offered the opportunity to attend the National Restorative Justice Symposium that takes place in a different location across Canada each year. Mr. Speaker, the Department of Justice is excited to honor Bobby Hamilton's legacy with this award and recognize others who exemplify her dedication and commitment to community. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister of Justice. Minister statements. Minister for Education, Culture, and Employment.
Mr. Speaker, today I rise to celebrate the vibrant Francophone community of the Northwest Territories during the 27th Annual Rendezvous de la Francophonie. This month-long celebration throughout March highlights the rich linguistic and cultural contributions of Francophones across Canada, including right here in the North. This year's theme, Cultivate Your Roots, is a call to action. It reminds us that Francophone culture is not just something to observe. It is something to nurture, grow, and share. From the classrooms of École Alain Saint-Cyr to the cultural events put on by the Fédération Franco-Ténoise, our Franco-Ténois community is thriving. On March 22nd, we invite residents to join us at the Legislative Assembly for a day of celebration. In partnership with the Franco-Ténois community, we are hosting interactive workshops on the historical roots of the French presence in the NWT, the relationship with Indigenous peoples, discussions by French learners, and Indigenous alumni of Collège Nordique Francophone, demonstrations, and a shared meal. These free events are a true reflection of the warmth and inclusivity of Francophone culture. Mr. Speaker, beyond this month, the Northwest Territories continue to play a key role in the broader Canadian francophonie. This year, the Northwest Territories is chairing the Ministers' Council on the Canadian Francophonie, a forum that brings together territorial, provincial, and federal governments together to strengthen French language and culture across the country. In June, the Northwest Territories will welcome Francophonie ministers from across the country to Yellowknife for a two-day meeting to collaborate on joint areas of interest. While they are here, I will ensure they learn about the energy, resilience, and diversity of our Franco-Ténois community, as well as the broader linguistic tapestry of all 11 official languages in the territory. Mr. Speaker, this is a time to celebrate, connect, and embrace the French language and culture in our territory. Whether you speak French fluently or are wanting to learn, I encourage everyone to take part in the many events happening throughout March. Let us come together to celebrate the language, traditions, and contributions of our Franco-Ténois community. Long live Canada, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister for Education, Culture, and Employment. Minister statements. Before we go on to the next one, I forgot to thank Bertha Catholic for the opening prayer, so I'd like to thank her for doing that in her language. Missed it. Oh, get you all excited. Member statements. Member from Yellowknife North.
Mr. Speaker, today I want to pick up the ball on advocacy that was ongoing in the last two assemblies around re-establishing an adult day program for seniors with dementia. Many seniors at some stage of Alzheimer's or dementia want to continue living at home, supported by a partner or family members. And we should be respectful of our elders' wishes. It also makes economic sense to support families to continue caring for their loved ones at home. It costs the territory much more to move elders into a long-term care facility. But many of us know firsthand how hard it is to care for a family member with dementia. I know of a woman who cannot leave her husband alone even for a short time as he gets lost even in their own home. A senior with dementia may be physically capable, but need constant supervision in case they start operating an appliance or a vehicle in an unsafe way because they're confused. Constant supervision and reminders are exhausting. Caregivers need real respite, and a few hours a week of home care cannot give them that. Now, up until 2016, Avens here in Yellowknife operated an adult day program It was a supervised program that seniors with dementia could attend in a group setting, and it opened up freedom for the spouse or caregiver to be able to leave the house and do errands, socialize with friends, or simply put their feet up in their own home and have a cup of tea. When that program closed, the Health Authority attempted unsuccessfully through an RFP process to have another third party operate the adult day program. While organizations such as the Yellowknife Senior Society have been working and advocating to find a way for the program to resume, the budget that was laid out in the RFP was totally unrealistic compared to the actual costs of safely running the program. But perhaps now there is a new opportunity to make this work. The Health Authority has just opened up a brand new long-term care facility in the Liwe-Guati building with trained staff, including recreation therapists, running day programs for the residents. Now, could day programs be opened up to drop-in clients as well, to allow seniors living at home to join the programs, even just a few times per week? That could be a huge help for the caregivers and families who are struggling to manage at home. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member from Yellowknife North. Member statements. Member from Range Lake.
Mr. Speaker, Jordan's Principle is a federal program that distributes billions of dollars nationwide annually to raise the standard of living for First Nations children. There is no funding cap. The program is on demand and available to First Nations families, their service providers, and their community governments, so long as the application provided to Indigenous Services Canada identifies the needs of First Nations children which are not currently met or up to the standard enjoyed by their non-Indigenous peers. Therefore, every year, a large portion of what the federal government distributes to Northern First Nations children through Jordan's Principle goes to our territory schools. Here in Yellowknife, school boards receive millions of dollars to support First Nations youth. For example, last year, YK1 received more money from Jordan's Principle than it did from taxpayers, to the tune of more than $6 million of their annual budget. These funds are vital for our schools, Mr. Speaker, to hire crucial support staff. However, last month, CBC reported 60% of support assistants were paid, and last month, CBC reported 60% of support assistants were paid for through Jordan's Principle funding. And this can include everything from classroom assistants to speech-language pathologists. Recently, however, Mr. Speaker, Indigenous Services Canada has been struggling with such a massive backlog of Jordan's Principle applications that the resulting delays have become so severe to schools across Canada that they're now cutting services due to that uncertainty. Now, to make matters worse, the federal government is narrowing the eligibility criteria for Jordan's Principle applications, including the eligibility for school-related applications. These changes will likely have a serious impact on education in the North, especially if assistant positions are reduced or cut entirely. I know that the minister is aware of these changes, but working families need to know that once the impact on our schools become clear, we will, as a government, advocate to prevent these cuts from taking place. If those efforts are not successful, then the minister has no choice but to adjust school funding to compensate appropriately. Otherwise, this will be yet another devastating blow to education for Indigenous children in the Northwest Territories. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member from Range Lake. Member statement. Member from the Sawtooth.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. GWT strategies for federal engagements. I want to discuss today the Northwest Territories economic strategy and preparedness. Mr. Speaker, in February, the Premier announced the new position of Senior Envoy to the Government of Canada, with a presence in both Yellowknife and Ottawa. I believe this position will strengthen our engagements and relationships, but there must be a clear objectives. Mr. Speaker, there is no question that the Government of the Northwest Territories needs and depends largely on federal funding to advance its infrastructure agenda. We have heard that the federal Arctic foreign policy will lead to increased defense spending and access to capital. The Premier recently called for strategic investment, writing in the media that the territory is key to securing Canada's critical minerals future. and that the federal government needs to ensure northern development is a national priority. Mr. Speaker, the GNWT should use this envoy position to effectively engage the federal government in a aggressive way. We must also strengthen our relationships on federal engagements, on staffing, and conventions to access funds for sovereignty, Arctic security, NATO defense obligations, while developing the potential of our critical minerals potential and reducing the cost of living. Mr. Speaker, the country's resources and security are in the global spotlight right now. It is time to ensure sustainable economic growth and strengthen Arctic sovereignty. But we also need a clear picture in this Assembly of how we will do that going forward. I cannot emphasize enough the crucial developments of building relationships with our federal counterparts, particularly during the tariff calamity. Later, I will have messages or questions to the Premier Mussey.
Thank you, member from the Sawtooth. Member statements. Member from Deitcho.
Mussey, Mr. Speaker. Today I'd like to talk about elder abuse. Mr. Speaker, too often elders are mistreated by the people responsible for their care. Rates of elder abuse increased during the pandemic. There were national reports of residents in care who had not been bathed in weeks, lack of pain treatment, and little or no turning of patients, and people going hungry. Now there is an urgent need to improve the lives of elders in the healthcare system and at home across the territory. Mr. Speaker, elders are teachers. They carry traditional knowledge that we need to learn from. We must care for them. Some of our elders are living from feast to famine, surviving off their pension only to find themselves abandoned once it's gone. Mr. Speaker, I've heard about people pressuring elders for pension check money. It's like they are trapped and their money belongs to others. There's no one to offer a helping hand or shovel snow, do the shopping, or simply sit and eat with them. Mr. Speaker, in communities, some people are speaking out, but in my writing, fear of speaking out keeps people from addressing these problems. Drugs have made their way into our communities, and users are taking advantage of the elders. Mr. Speaker, the Dene Nation has a campaign for the prevention of abuse and family violence. But I want to know how the Department of Health and Social Services will support our communities to ensure our elders are safe, respected, and cared for. I will have questions for the Minister of Health and Social Services. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member from the Deitcho. Member statements. Member from Nunavut Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, spring is around the corner, the sun is shining, and we all know that means things will soon start to melt. Mr. Speaker, that also means that communities around the north are busy getting ready for their yearly orders, excuse me, for their barging orders again. Mr. Speaker, we're looking at construction materials, equipment, household items, vehicles, and of course, most importantly, the annual retail restocking in the coastal communities. Mr. Speaker, given the disaster we looked at last year in Norman Wells and with the low water, I would hope that right now the department is looking at cutoff dates, so to ensure that construction companies and Indigenous governments and indeed just residents in the communities can know and it's communicated to them those dates so they can get their orders in, Mr. Speaker, and ensure that they get their materials in a timely fashion. I know, Mr. Speaker, that we'll be looking at, and I would hope that we're monitoring the water levels this year. We're looking at the trucking routes, considering road bans, and all the things that are important to this important shipping season, Mr. Speaker. So I will have some questions for the Minister of Infrastructure on what we're doing this year to prep for hopefully a much more successful barging season. Thank you.
Thank you, member from Nunavut Lake. Member statements. Member from Mophie.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. delivery of health care in the Clecho region. Mr. Speaker, I would like to discuss how primary health care reform will impact small communities. Most small communities have no permanent doctors. One report noted that NWT is funded for 80.7 full-time equivalent doctors. But as of September 2024, there were only 50 physicians registered, not including locums. According to the territorial medical director, health managers are asking whether residents in small communities are getting the same care they could expect if they were in Yellowknife or Inuvik or down south. Mr. Speaker, the main issues for small communities are continuing of care, limited access, and a shortage of doctors, nurses, and technicians. Historically, Mr. Speaker, Clecho region had its own hospital and staff, the Farrar Hospital in Bichico, which operated from 1936 until its closure in 1974. Today, most Clecho people travel to Yellowknife for health care. Mr. Speaker, community health centers are meant to provide accessible primary care services to small communities. Having hundreds of people from Clecho region use primary care in Yellowknife is not helping the system. The Clecho Community Services Agency manages health, wellness, and education services in Bichico, Gabiti, Wukwiti, and Wati. With more resources, Mr. Speaker, more nurses and doctors could be sent out to communities. Imagine being able to get simple blood tests done in community health center. Mr. Speaker, NTHSS is in the process of gathering information to better understand how to reform primary care. They need to put small communities first. I will have a question for the Minister of Health and Social Services. Thank you.
Thank you, member from Wolfing. Member statements. Member from Yellowknife Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm going to tell a story today about some excitement, some sadness, and hopefully opportunity, Mr. Speaker. I was speaking with the NWT Literacy Council about their skills for success. So here's some of the excitement. They have created a program. They work with 4 Clecho communities. They work in your riding, Mr. Speaker, in Fort Simpson, and even in the Mr. Nares, who's riding of the Fort McPherson in Aklavik, in those ridings. Mr. Speaker, in these 7 communities, they work out of 7 community learning centers. They create, they have agreements with some college staff. They create educational and work experience opportunities, and they get results, Mr. Speaker, because they have people in literacy programs that teach them skills, on-the-land training, resume writing, and even on-the-job experience. And some of these people, I'll say in Fort Simpson, it says everyone got a job. Guess what, in Fort McPherson? You got it. Everyone who took the program got a job, Mr. Speaker. What's being attacked here? Now the sadness. As we now tremble down to the next part of the plot. We have Aurora College butchering away and throwing away CLCs because if you read the 2025 and 2028 mandate, they have nothing for literacy. Shame. Nothing for adult literacy. Shame. So who's on attack? But don't worry, there's an opportunity. Education's on attack.
Tell us more.
Oh, I will tell you more. And thank you for asking, Mr. Speaker. Well, just before I get to that, I'll tell you, there is programs in Yellowknife. It's called Literacy Outreach. It's in Yellowknife. It's in Fort Smith. And believe it or not, it's in Inuvik. And it's helping Northerners get literacy all through the community learning centers. So here's your opportunity, Mr. Speaker. I promise, and I know everyone here is at the edge of their seats waiting, going, what's next? What's next? I think even the member for, Member Nares is crying over there. He can't wait with excitement. The NWT Literacy Council wants to be the partner. They say themselves, they can help save community learning. They can help educate adults, young people who've given up on school, where there's no opportunity or chance to get back into the education system, who can become productive citizens. Mr. Speaker, don't let this story end like a tragedy. Mr. Speaker, today is an opportunity. We have the NWT Literacy Council who will come to help save Northerners. Let's give them that chance, Mr. Speaker, and I'll have questions later today for the Honourable Minister of Education. Thank you.
Thank you. Member from Yonge Centre. Member statements. Colleagues, the Tom Longboat Award was established in 1951 to recognize Indigenous athletes for their outstanding contribution to sports in Canada. The awards have been given out every year since its inauguration. It remains the longest standing and one of the most prestigious awards for Indigenous athletes in the country. Each province and territory is given the opportunity to name one man and one woman to recipient of the Regional Tom Longboat Award. I'd like to congratulate both James Williams and Shakita Jensen for receiving this year's award. It's an honor, it's a great honor to see these both receive this recognition. Today, I'd like to recognize one of the award winners, Mr. James Williams. As part of the awards, they were able to bring a family member to the ceremony. He had the pleasure to share the evening with his son, Jimmy, where he received the award at the National Indigenous Sports Awards Gala, hosted by Aboriginal Sports Circle Canada in Ottawa, Ontario. I first met James in Fort Simpson at a ball tournament, where he was a little bit of baby in his mom's arms. He was always involved in sports. I can tell you this young man has lived in Fort Simpson and Nuvik and now in Yellowknife. As well, he's lived in southern Canada for a bit of time playing hockey. He's still active in sports, most notably hockey and Arctic sports at a very high level. It's amazing that even at the young age of 32, he still competes in Arctic sports internationally against younger athletes and is still being successful. As you're aware, Arctic sports is about competition against yourself and helping others, regardless of the territory, province, state, or country you represent. And true meaning of sport, I've witnessed this young man help other competitors achieve their best. As well, he's very big on giving back to the sports world. I noticed that he won the award by Facebook post. He did a great job on the post, and I'd like to share it here with you today. Unfortunately, with limited time, I'd like to deem it as read and printed in the insert. Again, congratulations, James and Shakita, for a job well done in representing the Northwest Territories. Member statements. Member from Toonaday-Willity.
Mr. Speaker, my communities of Toonaday-Willity are facing challenges on a scale they've never experienced before. These challenges include serious increase in criminal activity, drug use, and mental illness, which are affecting especially our youth. As important as it is to provide our youth easier access to addiction support and keep the streets safer through increased RCMP resources, I am afraid that these solutions are only address the symptoms and not the cause of the problem. What my communities need to prevent our youth from falling into the trap of addictions in the first place is a proper recreation and skill programming that can enrich their lives and open doors of opportunities for them to pursue their dreams and practice their culture. Recently, my community have lost recreation coordinator positions, which were responsible for providing youth and sports with recreation programming. Lutske and Fort Resolution in particular are left with great recreation facilities, but have no funding from MACA to provide maintenance, staffing, and programming. Instead, the First Nations are responsible, and they can't always keep these facilities staffed and operating with all these services for the youth. The youth are looking for safe, healthy, and active programming. My communities are also coming to me with creative proposals to establish local youth advocates who are skilled in navigating the services different departments have to offer and resourceful in the opportunities youth can access, not just sports related, but opportunities for arts, culture, revitalization, skill development, and career counseling. We need to reverse the trend of closing services in small communities and empower community leaders because they know what the youth are in their communities need. I look forward to asking the minister responsible for these services about the ideas later today so I can return to my communities after session and start working with them to bring forward exciting new proposals. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member from Trinidad-Willowday. Member statements. Member from Mackenzie Delta.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Evelyn Georgina Ross Perry, Tetragutchan member of our community, was a loving mom, a cherished friend, a beacon of love in all our lives. Evelyn's warmth and compassion touched everyone she met, but it was her role as a Juju and great Juju that she truly shined. Evelyn was born on November 16, 1946, and was the second oldest daughter of the late Bella Ross, and was traditionally and lovingly raised by her grandmother, the late Sarah Peter, and great uncle, the late Roddy Peter. She spoke fluently in her Gwich'in language and practiced her Gwich'in culture, and was a good cook, a licensed furrier, seamstress, everything but macrame, as she would say, and talented beater and embroiderer. And of course, a good storyteller. Evelyn loved life and had the biggest heart of anyone. She loved karaoke, spending time with her family and many friends. When Evelyn was home, she enjoyed participating in community events and loved the Midway Lake Music Festival, where she was her true Gwich'in self. Evelyn was our biggest supporter in faith, culture, and language traditions. And she later went to business school in Toronto. Later on, Evelyn taught the Gwich'in language in the schools around the Delta. For the past 13 years, she was the radio announcer for the Gwich'in language program for CKLB in Yellowknife. She wanted to be closer to her children and grandchildren, so she moved to Edmonton. As the announcer for the Gwich'in language program, CKLB radio allowed her to broadcast from Edmonton. She always said she would work until she was 80, and she almost made it. Evelyn lived a full, vibrant life and was enjoying living in Edmonton, where she had her sister Sarah, nephew Franklin, now deceased, niece Jenna, her son Jace, her daughter Maya, nearby, as well as her daughter Georgina, granddaughter Jade, and great-granddaughter Violet Evelyn. She loved it when she had visits with her other granddaughter Jolene and great-granddaughter Adriana. She loved being part of 4 generations. She was a constant visitor and brought great joy to her Auntie Bertha Carruthers and her brother James Thompson. She had many relatives, and she treasured all of them. Jesus took our dearest mother, sister, auntie, grandmother, and great-grandmother and friend by the hand and led her home on Sunday, January 26, 2025. Her kindness and wisdom will be remembered by many, and she lived life to the fullest without regrets and showed us the importance of friendship and respect. The Creator has gained a formidable angel. Until we meet again, rest easy with our ancestors and loved ones. Mr. Speaker, I'd just like to add that Evelyn was the interpreter here at the Legislative Assembly, and today her 2 nieces, Karen and Ellen, carry on that tradition. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member from Mackenzie Delta. Our condolences go out to the family. Member statements. Member statements. Returns to oral questions. Returns to oral questions. Recognition of visitors in the gallery. Member from the Nutcoot.
Today I'd like to recognize my nephew, James Williams. He's in the gallery today. I don't often get family members here, so thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Recognition of visitors in gallery. Member from Trinidad-Willowday.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I want to recognize a hunter, trapper, and a painter, a contractor for about 40 years. Originally from Fort Stripling, Alberta, lives in Fort Smith, but he's retired and living here in Yellowknife. I would like to welcome Beaver Marie, from a well-respected elder and a good friend of mine. Also, I want to recognize James Williams as well in the back. I want to say welcome here as well. Merci.
Recognition of visitors in the gallery. Member from Range Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to recognize David Waselsiu. He is the YK1 board chair here in Yellowknife and a member of the Range Lake constituency. Welcome, David.
Thank you, member from Range Lake. Recognition of visitors in gallery. Member from Kamloops.
Well, Mr. Speaker, this is the beauty of going last, is you get to repeat some people, but I'd like to say a big hello to constituent James Williams, powerhouse of an athlete, powerhouse of a parent, powerhouse of a coach, and powerhouse of a chair, David Waselsiu, who's the chair of the Yellowknife Education District number 1, so we get to spend some good time together. Thank you.
Thank you, member from Kamloops. Recognition of visitors in the gallery. It's my turn to embarrass James a little bit, but welcome to the Assembly, James. I greatly appreciate all that you've done for sports and the caribou out there as well. So thank you very much for being here today to allow me the honor of doing your member statement. Welcome to our Assembly. Colleagues, if we missed anyone in the gallery today, welcome to your house. Again, I'd like to thank you very much for giving us the honor to represent the people in Northwest Territories. I hope you are enjoying the proceedings. It is always nice to have people in the gallery. Recognition of visitors in the gallery, recognition of visitors in the gallery. Acknowledgements, acknowledgements, oral questions. Member from Yellowknife Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My member statement today, I talked about some challenges through the CLC and community outreach program through literacy. I'm going to ask the Minister of Education, Culture and Employment that knowing that there's going to be some significant change-ups and noting that the mandate of Aurora College no longer notes or may never have noted adult literacy, is she willing to engage with partners like the NWT Literacy Council in order to save these programs that are not only needed in the communities but in our larger centers such as Yellowknife, Inuvik, and Fort Smith. Thank you.
Thank you. Member from Yellowknife Centre. Minister of Education, Culture and Employment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this is most definitely an easy commitment because I've previously made it to the member for Yellowknife North. Absolutely. Thank you.
Minister of Education, Culture and Employment. Member from Yellowknife Centre.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm glad to hear it because I was speaking to the council and we're concerned about the opportunities. Would the minister be willing to lean into the Aurora College to ensure that any of the CLC money that could have gone to these communities could be partnered with specifically the NWT Literacy Council, because they don't have that perspective. So if that last commitment was working together, well, yeah, that's great. But can we look at getting Aurora College to work directly with the Literacy Council to save the Community Learning Center projects? Thank you.
From Yellowknife Centre. Minister of Education, Culture and Employment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as I've previously shared with the House, I cannot direct the operations of Aurora College. That would be seen as interference, and I'm prohibited from doing so under the Aurora Colleges Act. But the commitment that I have made is that, first of all, to acknowledge that this is an issue that needs to be reviewed, and that there are other parties within the Northwest Territories who want to be involved in some of this work, which is very promising and very good. And so, as the Minister of Education, I've committed to following up on these programs, following up with communities, and ensuring that at the end of the day, we're talking to the partners that want to be involved in this project. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister of Education, Culture and Employment. Final supplementary. Member from Yellowknife Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There's nothing prohibiting the minister from inquiring with the board chair and the president and maybe the board overall about saying, here's a partner willing to meet the needs of the communities, Mr. Speaker, and that includes even the larger communities. So, Mr. Speaker, would the minister be willing to engage in this conversation, especially because this House is the funder? Thank you.
Thank you, member from Yellowknife Centre. Minister of Education, Culture and Employment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm certainly always happy to have conversations, always happy to pass along the messages from the House, and certainly very interested in learning what the future of literacy programming looks like in the territory, and working very hard on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister of Education, Culture and Employment. Oral questions. A member from Inuvik Boot Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Following up on my member statement, my first question for the Minister of Infrastructure is around the sailing dates, and importantly, has the department now given the analysis of what happened last year, are they looking at sailing dates and as importantly, communicating those dates out to the residents of the communities that will be ordering the goods and services for the barging? Thank you.
Thank you. Member from New Boot Lake, Minister of Infrastructure.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, sailing dates and specifically cargo cutoff dates are typically communicated a little later in the spring, as we're still waiting to see what the water levels might look like as we get closer into the spring dates. I can say, Mr. Speaker, and I'm happy to say that we have a new director over at MTS, and director was able to use the opportunity of NWTAC to make some connections and good connections with communities, so that when we are able to communicate and as we're able to communicate, we're doing that in an effective way. Thank you.
Minister of Infrastructure. Member from New Boot Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you for that. And yes, and you know, earlier the better when it comes to getting those dates out for sure. But I appreciate that there are factors in that. Mr. Speaker, I spoke in previous member statements about the need to maybe look at logistically looking at Inuvik and or Tuk or both, kind of ramping them up a little more, given that the difficulty we're having getting through the ramparts and sailing now, and to maybe do some of that barging from Inuvik or Tuk all the way up to Fort Good Hope, and then certainly the coastal communities. Is that something that the Marine Transportation Services are looking at, kind of building up some of that infrastructure this year? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
From New Boot Lake, Minister of Infrastructure.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There are no plans at the moment to significantly modify the infrastructure that's up in the Beaufort Delta region. However, I can say that there was a tug and a barges left up in Inuvik back in 2025, so that they're ready, more able to move quickly as soon as the waters are navigable. Obviously still hoping that this year's water levels come back and that we're not facing quite the same level of challenges next year, but did take those steps to say that we are positioned so that at early parts of the season, when hopefully things are easier to navigate, that we'll be able to do so. Thank you.
Infrastructure. Final supplementary. Member from New Boot Lake.
Thank you for that. I appreciate that, Mr. Speaker. So it's my assumption then, and I know one shouldn't assume, that the majority of the goods and services that are going to be transported into the coastal communities in the New Valley Settlement region will indeed look to be transported via truck to Inuvik and or Tuk for those hubs to get that product into the coastal communities. Thank you.
From New Boot Lake, I got my little note given to me. Please remember to slow down a little bit for our translators. Please and thank you. Minister of Infrastructure.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, so last year we were able to see the successful delivery using, in some cases, coming up and around the top and utilizing Tuktoyaktuk as a delivery starting point, as well as relying on the Dempster Highway. Obviously, there are challenges with both of those routes, Mr. Speaker, but we certainly were able to use those over the last couple of years and have always learned lessons to help improve it. So now, I don't want to say that that's for sure the only option this year. We are still hopeful. MTS monitors water levels. We work with ECC's hydrology team about water levels. And the word's not final yet that the situation is unnavigable. So again, for the moment, we're sort of keeping an eye on things. We've made plans to go in whichever direction we need to. And as with the last couple of years, we'll be able to respond once the water levels are more clear. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister of Infrastructure. Oral questions. Member from the Sawtooth.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Further to my statement, my questions is a follow-up and directed to the Premier. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Premier has said the territory is in discussions with the federal government to push for tangible action like competitive mining incentives and a strong federal partnership. What work is the senior envoy doing to support the economic mandate of the Assembly in these discussions? Merci.
Thank you, member from the Sawtooth. Mr. Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There's no doubt that the focus these days is on the economy, and that's across Canada. Because we're facing a threat from an external actor who is really threatening our economic stability and viability of our country. So the economy is going to loom large with the role of the senior envoy, and the purpose of this role is to have a connection with Ottawa so that we can move things along. There's big projects that we can't do ourselves here in the Northwest Territories, things like the Mackenzie Valley Highway. We'll definitely need federal support for that. Tulsan hydro expansion will need federal support for that. And so it's ensuring that we have those touch points with our federal counterparts. There's also things like the North of 60 mineral exploration tax credit that we have been pushing, and that's another thing that we can't do that. The federal government can do that, though. There's also the opportunity to meet with industry. Industry is always in and out of Ottawa lobbying, and there's opportunities for the envoy to have those types of meetings with industry and discuss what's going on in the territory, and to support Indigenous governments in their pursuit of economic opportunities that involve Ottawa. And so there's a number of Indigenous governments in the territory with great relationships in Ottawa, know how to get into a minister's office, a federal minister's office, but we have a number of Indigenous governments that don't have settled claims, don't have that level of capacity or integration with Ottawa, and the envoy will be able to help them as well. And if we support an Indigenous government to advance their economic opportunities in the economy in their region, that helps the entire territory. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Premier. Member from the Sawtooth.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thanks to the Premier for that clarification. My second question, can the Premier explain the transparency measures and the process for how the work of the envoy to the Government of Canada will be reported back to the House? Merci.
Member from the Sawtooth. Mr. Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And of course, I'm always here in the House to answer questions. So that's a transparency method that works across government. But the results are going to be, the accountability is going to be in the results. I hope to be able to show this House and show members that with the support of the envoy and the entire GNWT, we're actually getting things done. And so I don't have a framework to parse out, what percentage of that success is attributable to this role. But the fact is that, I am here to be held to account for the actions of the government and for my actions as minister. And so that's always an option for members. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Premier. Final supplementary, member from Sawtooth.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And thanks to the Premier for the explanation to that previous question. My last question, can the Premier explain the mandate of the envoy position and specifically say whether this will be a permanent position within the Premier's office or just a temporarily support head of the federal election? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member from Sawtooth. Mr. Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So the idea behind the envoy is to have a dedicated, proactive, and strategic link between the political offices in Ottawa and the political offices here in the Northwest Territories. That's what's often needed to get things moving. And as to whether or not the position is permanent, well, nothing in politics is permanent, so I can't speak for the future of the position past this government. And even during the life of this government, we'll see how things work. I think too often the government will make a decision and then stick with it, whether or not it's working. I'm happy to see how things work and adjust as needed. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Premier. Oral questions. Member from Great Slate.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my questions today are for the Minister of Finance. So on March 3rd, the GNWT received an increase to the federally imposed debt limit from 1.8 to 3.1 billion. Can the minister explain if the extent of such a large increase to the borrowing limit is only to respond to expenditure shocks like climate disaster impacts? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member from Great Slate. Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, no, that's not the only reason. The situation that we've faced over the last several years of climate impacts and fiscal challenges has put us in a situation where the significant sized operating surpluses that we've been managing to create for ourselves, rather than having those available to reinvest or to cushion us, are winding up being used for those purposes. And so that means that we then take on more debt to fund operations and to fund our investment in capital. So looking then over the next few years and frankly seeing, what is happening and what may be coming over the next few years, whether it's climate change or other geopolitical risks, puts us in a situation that to continue to ensure that we have a borrowing room available to us, and what that borrowing is likely to be, required us to go and seek a borrowing limit increase. Obviously, we were coming up right close to what that borrowing limit would be. The fiscal responsibility policy for us created an internal amount or an internal threshold where if we hit it, we that would trigger our own internal obligation to go and ask. So between those two factors, Mr. Speaker, that's what led to the request. Thank you.
Minister of Finance, member from Great Slave.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, will the minister consider revising the fiscal responsibility policy so that the Assembly can invest in discrete, targeted ways to alleviate some of the social issues we have collectively prioritized? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member from Great Slave, Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The fiscal responsibility policy puts up some guardrails around how we take on debt and for our debt management. And while that's obviously something I'm happy to talk about that, and it's important to maintain those guardrails, we want to be in a situation where we're utilizing our debt ideally to invest in things that benefit future generations, since those would be the generations that would ultimately be paying off debts, whereas operational expenditures, programs and services of today ideally are funded by the operational budgets that we have today. So, Mr. Speaker, there's no reason that this Assembly and that the government can't continue to make choices around operations and spending. The fiscal responsibility policy tries to simply put some guardrails around when we take on the debt to do the things that we need to do as a government. Again, shouldn't create any kind of mental or political barriers to ensuring that we're meeting the responsibilities of the Assembly. Thank you.
Minister of Finance. Last, or oral questions. Last supplementary. Member from Great Slave.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I was reminded by a constituent before this session that in the 1990s, the federal government decided to make reductions on the health and social transfer payments. Such a situation doesn't seem impossible now. So, bluntly, the TFF and equalization payments could be on the chopping block in a new government. Can the minister broadly explain the GNWT's approach to TFF negotiations, which are ongoing and upcoming, and what she hopes to see? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member from Great Slave. Member for Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I obviously have not a whole lot of control over what a new federal government may or may not do to funding levels that support all three territories and to, frankly, 40% of Canada's land mass. Certainly with the current geopolitical climate, would certainly hope that Ottawa recognizes the importance of investing in 40% of Canada's land mass as a statement about Arctic sovereignty, as a statement about Arctic security. The territorial formula financing approach for us comes up due in 2029. We are engaging with the other two territories. We want to work together in terms of ensuring that as we all move forward, that we're moving forward, understanding what each one may be asking or how we want to approach this. And what I can say lastly, Mr. Speaker, with respect to what we're doing today, we are re-examining the level of funding that we receive, the kinds of inputs that go into the formula that Ottawa then utilizes to determine the amount, and to really look at whether or not some of the inputs that are there and some of what the considerations that are given have actually kept pace with the reality of the costs and the needs and the costs of providing for the needs of the people of the Northwest Territories. So that is a not uncomplicated economic analysis and position to make. That's where we're getting that started now. So we're not waiting until 2029 to get there, but we can begin that process and that advocacy today. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister of Finance. Oral questions. Member for Mophie.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. According to the NTHSSA website, the goal of primary health care reform is 6 demonstration projects to test primary health care improvements. Can the minister say what projects will be completed in the Kloochie region? Thank you.
Thank you, member for Mophie. Minister of Health and Social Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the department is working with the Clecho government and TCSA to build capacity for diabetes management, prevention, and awareness programs aimed to help people with diabetes management of their condition, raise community awareness to prevent, so diabetes and engagement. So one of the things that they're doing is they're going to be doing this through workshop, cooking classes, and cultural programs. It is a piece of the primary care reform that will be in the Clecho on chronic disease management. That is the piece of that will be happening in the Clecho. Right now, I think within the staffing levels that they're having struggles with in the Clecho, it hasn't really got off the ground yet, but that is what's planned for Clecho. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister of Health and Social Services. Member from Mophie.
Thank you for the information. Primary health care reform is intended to include opportunities for public feedback. Can the minister commit to conducting a detailed public consultation with community health system clients? Thank you.
Thank you, Member from Mophie. Minister of Health and Social Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as we are rolling out primary care in the different areas, as you are aware that NTHSSA has just released that they will be doing the primary care in Yellowknife consult, so patients that are going through the system they'll be doing a survey with them and on their feedback of the services, which will help to drive the improved changes. And so as we are rolling out those in the different areas of primary care, those things can be put in place. We would need to ensure that those programs are rolling out so that they have something to compare to. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister of Health and Social Services. Final supplementary. Member from Mophie.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, family doctor is largely unavailable to most residents. It is foreign to us in small communities. Can the minister explain how primary health care reform will lead to having more doctors and nurses in small communities? Thank you.
Member from Mophie. Minister of Health and Social Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, primary care reform, as it's rolling out into the small communities, what we do have actually is a form of primary care in the communities right now. But what we need to be doing is we need to be looking at all of our communities, and that's what the working group is established for small communities and health cabins, to be looking at what are the needs of those communities and how are we going to be able to provide the services that are needed in those small communities, knowing that not every small community is going to have a resident physician. They will, but maybe there is a different makeup of frontline staff that especially in Indigenous communities. Can we get more local people that are in the communities to train and do certain jobs? That is one area. Another area is physicians, and the Clecho is actually doing this, and some of the other regions now they're having appointments with a physician that can't always be in all the communities, but can be virtually, and being able to have that connection with a nurse there, and then a physician to be able to walk through some of those conditions. It's opening up we're expanding on how we're utilizing our services and our technology to improve the care in the smaller communities. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister of Health and Social Services. Oral questions. Member from Yellowknife North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My questions are for the Minister of Health and Social Services. As I spoke about in my member statement, organizations such as the Yellowknife Senior Society have been advocating strongly for the adult day program to be reestablished in Yellowknife, particularly to support seniors with dementia and their caregivers. So what consultation has the department done specifically with organizations and families supporting seniors with dementia and Alzheimer's to assess the need for such an adult day program? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
North, Minister of Health and Social Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, there has been no consultation done since 2019 review of the Adult Day program in Yellowknife, which included a survey of home care clients and their families in Yellowknife, and that end result showed that there was no need for an adult day program. In 2019, there were preliminary discussions with NGOs about the potential to take on running an adult day program, but there was no interest and there was no feedback provided as to the funding amount. The department has completed the new long-term care standards that includes where available and how adult day activities may be provided within long-term care facilities. They may be provided to long-term care residents in community dwellings, adults who may have physicians or cognitive impairments, and living with chronic illness. Within the staffing model for long-term care, there are activity aides or recreational therapy positions, but this is geared towards providing supports to the residents that live in long-term care. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister of Health and Social Services. Member from Yellowknife North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I think the minister perhaps anticipated my second question here, but and I would just point out, that home care clients may be a different audience or different group than specifically people supporting seniors with dementia and Alzheimer's. But can the minister explain what it's done to consider the feasibility of opening up day programming beyond the live-in long-term care residents at our long-term care facilities, and whether other drop-in clients could be included in some of that programming? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member from Yellowknife North, Minister of Health and Social Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, when the department reaches out to home care families, those families are a variety of issues that they're from families that are providing care to young children, to members with with dementia, and I encourage, if they're living with people with dementia and supporting family members, that home care is a support. So if they're not accessing that service, I just want to make sure that they know that that's a service that they can be accessing. But currently, the NTHSSA does not have funding for the question of opening up day programming in the long-term care residents. So the funding that is in long-term care is for full-scale admissions and to being able to provide programming only to those residents that are in there at this time. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister of Health and Social Services. Final supplementary. Member from Yellowknife North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wonder if the minister could commit to come back to me or come back to this House with some information about how much funding the department had been willing to offer in the RFPs that it had previously put out for an adult day program, and examine opportunities for that amount of funding to, be added on perhaps to current programming in long-term care facilities. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member from Yellowknife North, Minister of Health and Social Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as many know how our budget works, that when the NTHSSA or the Health Authority gets their money dedicated to providing services, whatever that amount was in 2019 or prior to that, has been reallocated to other areas that are supporting long-term and community care programming. So if the department was to go back and look at committing to reviewing options, these options would be necessary. If there's options, they're going to need funding. And what we are looking at is piloting in the new year programming that could be worked alongside in our long-term care once we've had admissions here for those home care clients. And looking at how that would be funded. So that's something that is in the works, in the planning, but it would need to have funds for that approved to do that. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Health and Social Services. Oral questions. Member from Decho.
Merci, Mr. Speaker. These questions are to the Minister of Health. Can the minister say what specific measures the Department of Health and Social Services is taking to address the issue of elder abuse, particularly in relation to financial exploitation and neglect within our small communities. Merci.
From the Deitcho, Minister of Health and Social Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, elder abuse is a whole-of-government approach. The Department of Health and Social Services runs a territorial-wide annual elder abuse awareness campaign in recognition of World Elder Abuse Awareness Day. The department also maintains web pages and prints resources with information about elder abuse and available services. Most recently, the 2024 Seniors Information Handbook incorporated a more robust safety and security section covering consumer protection, emergency food and shelter preventing and reporting crime, which includes fraud, scams, and cybercrime, legal programs and services. The handbook also includes contact information for a wide range of government, non-for-profit, Indigenous governments, and organizations and community-level programs and services. The department is in the process of drafting material to inform the development of training for service providers to recognize and respond to elder abuse. The department also provides funding to support NWT Senior Society for a variety of initiatives, including workshops related to empowering seniors, community members to identify and address elder abuse. Older adults experiencing elder abuse may also access other services such as community counseling support, referrals through various helplines, emergency shelters, justice-related services such as community-based victim services and court orders. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister of Health and Social Services. Member from the Deitcho.
Thank you. Can the minister explain how the department is working with local organizations like the Dene Nation and other organizations for the prevention of abuse and family violence to ensure that elders receive the necessary support, such as assistance with daily tasks and companionship? Thank you.
From the Deitcho, Minister of Health and Social Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the department commits to looking into with the Dene Nation, whatever the services that they're providing. We can get back to the member on if there has been conversations back and forth with the Dene Nation. But the Senior Handbook does provide a lot of resources to ensure that elders receive necessary supports. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Social Services. Final supplementary. Member from the Deitcho.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, given the increased concerns about drug-related exploitation of elders in our communities, can the minister say what steps the department is taking to collaborate with law enforcement and social service to ensure elder safety? Thank you.
Deitcho. Minister of Health and Social Services.
Mr. Speaker, I want to remind all residents of NWT, family violence supports are available for all residents, and that includes elders. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister of Health and Social Services. Oral questions. Member from Range Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, earlier today I talked about Jordan's principle and the troubling developments that, although there are good reasons to look at the eligibility funding, it was so open beforehand that schools really didn't have to worry about this, and now they may have to. So I know that schools are worried about whether they can continue to provide supports to First Nations students. I'm wondering, what is the minister's plan if that funding is diminished in whatever capacity? Thank you.
Minister of Education, Culture and Employment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I share the members' huge concerns on this. We ourselves put about $165 million from the Department of Education, Culture and Employment straight into education bodies. And over the course of the time that Jordan's Principle has been available, schools have been able to put in their own applications looking for support for other areas and have attracted a further $60 million into our education system. And so we heavily rely on Jordan's Principle within the territory. This week, I do have meetings with our education ministers from our sister territories because these concerns are broadly shared, and we intend to continue to advocate for Jordan's Principle funding for the territories because we know it is just crucially important. Thank you.
Minister of Education, Culture, and Employment. Member from Range Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, can the minister work with territorial and provincial counterparts to ensure that schools are carved out of any stringent funding applications? Because that seems to be the issue. We've heard the stories, including from the family, the initial family, that this money was being used for Xboxes and ballet lessons and things like that. So there's a sense to put some guardrails around it, but our schools shouldn't have to suffer for that. So can the minister commit to advocating for our schools when she does reach out to her territorial and provincial counterparts? Thank you.
Member from Range Lake. Minister of Education, Culture, and Employment.
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
Minister of Education, Culture, and Employment. Final supplementary. Member from Range Lake.
Very concise. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you to the minister. If the funding falls through, however, will the minister bring forward additional funding, at least for this fiscal year, to ensure to the next fiscal year, whenever the funding falls through, as a bridge so students and First Nations kids don't lose out on opportunities that this money provides for them? Thank you.
From Range Lake, Minister of Education, Culture, and Employment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, right now we're working with education bodies to completely understand, exactly what this entails. So, as the member alluded to in their statement, classroom assistants are a huge component of this, but there are other elements that education bodies are having funded through Jordan's Principle, and we don't vet these applications. We don't see them. Applications go from education bodies straight to the federal government. The other crucial piece around this is the federal government does have guardrails within their policy. Their criteria states that they have to have a professional vet the application of a student, and so the federal government does have guardrails, and I absolutely, as the member alluded to, will be taking this up with my counterparts, because the essence and intent of this legislation is crucially important, not just for the territories, but clear across the country. Thank you.
Minister of Education, Culture, and Employment. Oral questions. Member from Trinity Willity.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we say that youth are our future. It also takes a community to raise a child. Mr. Speaker, my communities are looking to establish a youth advocacy position that is urgently needed, who can connect youth in my communities to the many diverse opportunities that may interest them for sports, culture, education, and counseling. They may require some work between departments, but MACA can provide the best opportunity to start laying the groundwork by funding these positions through the Hamlet First Nation offices. My question to the Minister of MACA: can the Minister agree to working with my communities to establish funding processes so that these positions can be filled? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member from Trinity Willity. Minister of Municipal and Community Affairs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm sure the member's aware the difficult situation Fort Resolution's in with their funding for their community and how their community is being operated by a public administrator. Normally, communities run their rec coordinators or youth representatives through their O&M out of their municipal funding, and that's usually decided on by your municipal councils and stuff, but MACA is working with the community to see what options are available with the current funding they have. A lot of this money that is being used right now is part of the debt repayment plan for the Hamlet of Fort Resolution. But I know that the community has been reaching out and utilizing some of the pots of funding that is out there, so the youth contribution funding and healthy communities funding and stuff. So I think there's somewhere around $65,000 of funding that they've utilized so far from the various pots that the GNWT has. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister of Municipal and Community Affairs. Member from Trinity Willity.
Mr. Speaker, Lutske and Fort Resolution have a large arena recreation facilities, but the First Nation have to maintain them, staff them, and provide programming, and they don't have the resources. Mr. Speaker, can the minister commit to begin providing funding through his department to these facilities so that the communities can maximize the benefits of the gyms and arenas to keep the youth busy in sport and recreation? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Trinity Willity, Minister of Municipal and Community Affairs.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Again, The municipal funding that we distribute through all 33 communities are used to operate their municipalities. That was part of the New Deal back in the day in order for communities to have a more hands-on grip of operating their communities because they're the ones that know best for their communities. So with that, the communities have the opportunity to operate their facilities, and how they allocate those funds within their communities is the best way to do it. Also, just keeping in mind there is funds available out there. Like I was saying earlier, there's a bunch of pots out there of money that can be used to youth sports activities or youth recreational activities, and it's up to the community members to reach out to those organizations and try to get a hand on some of those pots. But again, understanding the complications with some of these communities, for MACA, for an example, with Fort Resolution, there is some conversation in the background on what we can try to do to assist a community like Fort Resolution. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister of Municipal and Community Affairs. Final supplementary member from Tune-a-Day-Willity.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just find it hard to believe that, we're still trying to deal with the problems in our community with alcohol and drugs, etc. But we still got policies we've got to work around. I'm asking the minister if he could have a heart and take a look at how we could deal with these issues in small communities, especially when we have addiction in our small communities and drugs. So I'm asking you here today, what can you do to help our small communities? Thank you.
From Tune-a-Day-Willity, Minister of Municipal and Community Affairs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I know as well as much as the other members do that the government isn't going to fix all your problems. It takes a community to raise a community, and some of the opportunities for the residents in his communities have the opportunity to take residence, or the residents have the opportunity to take an initiative to start making healthy choices for the communities. There are funds available, O&M funding for the municipalities, and like I said earlier, MACA is looking at dealing or helping out with Fort Res in regards to potentially assisting on some of those funds for youth coordinator or youth worker or whatever it was that the member was speaking of there. But that being said, it's not just about the government having funds for the communities. It's about, like he's pointing at me, having a heart. I got a heart. Mr. Speaker, I think the opportunity is for the communities. Yes. The communities to work together, and like I said, the department is also working with his community. Thank you.
Minister of Municipal and Community Affairs. Oral questions. Member from Yellowknife Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to follow up on a couple of questions my good colleague, the member for the Sahtu, had mentioned earlier and brought up with the Premier regarding the transparency and process of His Excellency, our envoy to Ottawa, Mr. Speaker. And for the record, his pay scale is not even on the public registry of the GNWTs. But all in, his cost the GNWT is paying $400,000 roughly in round numbers. And so, Mr. Speaker, I'm trying to figure out a little more than MLAs have never received a letter explaining exactly what this position is doing, so we don't even know how to measure success. So, Mr. Speaker, can the Premier enlighten the House specifically what is the mandate and how do we measure success with this envoy, His Excellency, being appointed to Ottawa? Thank you.
Member from Yellowknife Centre, Mr. Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll have to take that on notice.
Mr. Premier. Oral questions. Member from Range Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm a big supporter of the Community Safety Officer Program that's currently being piloted in Fort Liard.
Hear, hear.
Unfortunately, I've learned recently, and I think maybe the public has as well, that the feds are going to be clawing back that funding after this year if for provinces and territories they don't have community safety officer legislation. Can the minister, or sort of the Premier as Minister of Justice, can he let us know what that would entail, what community safety officer legislation looks like? Because if it is something that's important to our communities, this is a program that lots of people have been talking about over the years, let's get it done. So how complicated is it? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
From Range Lake, Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's very complicated. So the legislation that would be required is a police act, which is the type of legislation that would allow municipalities to set up their own police forces and things like that. So it's not a simple community safety officer piece of legislation. It's much broader. Thank you.
Minister of Justice. Member from Range Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we do have a sheriff. No, we don't have a sheriff's act. That's another issue, a sheriff's act. I mean, we do have peace officers that are employees of the territorial government that have peace officer status under the criminal code. Is it time to look at this? We do have a crime problem. The Premier's well aware of it. The Premier has campaigned on it outside and inside the House. So maybe it's time to allocate additional resources. I don't want to lose this program, and I want to keep our streets safe. Will the Premier bring forward legislation to bring sheriffs, community safety officers, and any other police that the police force, the territorial government, or armed communities want to create? Thank you.
From Range Lake, Minister of Justice.
Mr. Speaker, there's a lot of legislation I would love to bring forward during the life of this Assembly. The Police Act, that would be one of them. Sheriff's Act. It could probably go on and on and on. But we have limited resources, and we have to provide the legislation for the entire territory. The same way Ontario, Alberta, all these other jurisdictions have to provide legislation, we have to do that as well, but we're a much smaller jurisdiction, so it's more difficult to deliver that amount of legislation. For this Assembly, we have a full agenda, but future assemblies may wish to look at that. Thank you.
Minister of Justice. Final supplementary. Member from Range Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, as this House knows, it's pretty easy for members on this side of the House to bring forward legislation. So I'll do the Premier a favor. I can start drafting a bill to bring public safety officers into law in the Northwest Territories. If that comes forward, will he support that?
Hear, hear.
Thank you.
From Range Lake, Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I know we're not supposed to get into hypotheticals here on the floor, so I'll leave that one alone. Thank you.
Minister of Justice. Oral questions. Member from Yonge Centre.
I was worried you were going to call, Mr. Speaker. Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I want to follow up on my question to the Minister of Housing, the ones I asked yesterday regarding the potential opportunity or new contract with the NWT Disabilities Council. And I'd like to find out for the House, is the Minister planning to make some type of financial arrangement with this organization in secret, or is she willing to talk about hypotheticals or what type of transparent process is the Minister going to give members of this House with what type of deal they may or may not be working on behind the scenes that she's told me about, but only she can reveal? Thank you.
Member from Yonge Centre. Colleagues, we're not talking about secrets. We're talking about stuff that has happened, and if there's a confidential letter that's being out there, we cannot be discussing it here in the House. Minister of Housing, NWT.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I indicated yesterday, Housing NWT is working with the NWT Disabilities Council, working in collaboration and supporting this non-for-profit society within the City of Yellowknife. There is a group, there's a board of volunteers, and Housing is working in collaboration with them, communicating about possibilities with housing in the City of Yellowknife. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister responsible for Housing, NWT. Member from Yonge Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the Minister commit that before any agreement is formalized, that a discussion is brought to the appropriate standing committee? Thank you.
Member from Yonge Centre. Minister responsible for Housing, NWT.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What we're dealing with here is years of collaboration with NWT Disabilities Council, so this is nothing new. This has been happening for years with Housing NWT and NWT Disabilities Council. We're trying to find solutions here, so the opportunity to talk to Standing Committee about it, absolutely we can do that. There's no secrets here, as the member mentioned, and we're working in collaboration, working in supporting this group to get their project moving forward, as well as Housing's project. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister responsible for Housing, NWT. Final supplementary. Member from Yonge Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm not sure what the Minister's saying. I'm not allowed to ask about secrets according to you. So there's no secrets, I agree. So thank you, Mr. Speaker, for that guidance. Mr. Speaker, the question really comes back to is that I understand disabilities is a significant need in the sense of challenges. I support that. My concern is the appropriate group getting the appropriate supports, one that we can bank on, that can follow through without becoming a long-term financial liability of the GNWT. That said, Mr. Speaker, I repoint the question back to the Minister, which is, would the Minister ensure that she consult with committee before any deal is finalized in writing. Thank you.
Minister, or member from Elm Lake Centre. Minister responsible for Housing and NWT.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As Minister of Housing and NWT, working with operational staff, professionals that we hire to lead us with Housing and NWT, we have a responsibility to make these decisions on behalf of government. I consult with my cabinet colleagues, but if decisions need to be made with committee and consulting committee, I would be happy and welcome that. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister responsible for Housing and NWT. Oral questions. Member from Range Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I know I only asked about this yesterday, but I'd like to ask the Minister of Education, Culture and Employment if she has any updates for this House on the Northwest Territories nominee program. Thank you.
Thank you, member from Range Lake. Minister of Education, Culture and Employment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have no updates today. Thank you.
Minister of Education, Culture and Employment. Member from Range Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, can the minister provide us with guidance on how we should reach out to people who have been coming to our offices concerned about this program? Now that this is that there's some hope that the program can be expanded or extended, that we can get those numbers back, people continue to ask. So, and it's good that this information's out there so people know what's at stake. So, can the minister give guidance on what we should be providing back to our constituents who are worried about this about their spots coming to an end and having to leave the Northwest Territories with their families? Thank you.
From Range Lake, Minister of Education, Culture and Employment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, at the end of the day here, we're talking about people, and this is a very, very emotional subject for people who live in the Territory. 99% of the people who are part of our nominee program are people who are already living in the Northwest Territories, and people who do apply to the nominee program as for those potential spots have to have worked in the Territory with an employer already. So those are people that are already living in the NWT, they're contributing to our communities, they are friends, they are neighbors, they are Northerners, and so this is a very, very difficult time. So I absolutely expect that most of us will be getting outreach from people who are worried about getting a spot and maintaining the North as home. And so I wanted to start off by saying that because I think it's really important to acknowledge the emotion and the heart that's involved in this. And I appreciate the member and multiple members from the other side of the House for taking these phone calls. People can certainly always call our immigration office. They can speak as well to Minister MacLeod, our MP, our Member of Parliament. And I know that our Member of Parliament, immigration is 80% of what he fields in his office here in the Northwest Territories. So this conversation is very important, but I also want to be cautious in that we're not giving people false hope, given how important this is to people of the Northwest Territories. But I can assure the member that I will continue to advocate. Thank you.
Minister of Education, Culture and Employment. Final supplementary. Member from Range Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I know the minister is on the same page, but I knew much of that response because that's what I've been telling people as well. We're all very compassionate. We want things to work. But to me and to many others, it seems like the power is in our hands to make a decision and bring back these spots and also welcome asylum seekers into the Northwest Territories and support them from these places that they've fled from, give them new lives in Canada, and support population growth in the North and our workforce as well. The power is in the minister's hands. Why isn't she taking it to make a decision and bring our numbers back up, help these families out, help asylum seekers out? Seems like a win-win to me. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member from Range Lake, Minister of Education, Culture and Employment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, because the federal government hasn't yet told me what is involved in the deal, what it is that they are asking of us, and what it is and how they are supporting residents in return. So that's the information that I'm waiting for. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister of Education, Culture and Employment. Oral questions. Member from Great Slave.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, like my colleague from Range Lake, I have concerns for my constituents in the nominee program. I've spoken with the minister at length. Can the minister commit to bringing a plan forward for folks who have expiring work permits in 2026 to the House in the next sitting, May, June? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member from Great Slave, Minister of Education, Culture and Employment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, absolutely, the way that we shifted the criteria based on our reduction in allotments this year was to really focus on those individuals who had expiring work permits in 2025. And I appreciate the member bringing forward the concern around people who have work permits expiring at the beginning of 2026, especially given that it was February before we launched this program. What we're doing with our stakeholder partners is spending time this year in really focusing on if we do have consolidated numbers going forward in 2026. We don't know what's going to happen at the federal government at this point, but if we do have consolidated numbers again, then we need to establish a plan that really prioritizes the benefit of the NWT at the end of the day and really figures out how we can ensure that we're being strategic yet fair in this process. And so that is something that I, along with ECE, am focused on doing, is having these stakeholder conversations. Thank you.
Thank you. Minister of Education, Culture and Employment. Member from Great Slate.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I too have planned stakeholder conversations, and I'm happy to collaborate with the minister on this one. Mr. Speaker, when it comes to the folks who are seeking asylum status, can the minister speak to whether or not the funding is adequate and the resources are adequate for us to be doing that currently? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member from Great Slate. Minister of Education, Culture and Employment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this is part of the information that I'm looking to ascertain from the federal government and to understand really what the resource needs would be of people who would be identified as asylum seekers as part of this program. I know from just listening to interactions on the floor of the House, there's a huge demand, for example, mental health supports across the territory. And so what kind of additional supports would we require in order to invite and welcome more asylum seekers in the territory, depending on what their health needs are, what their housing needs are. And so these are things that we need to consider as a territory and ensure that we have clear communication on that with the federal government. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister of Education, Culture and Employment. Oral questions. Oral questions. Member from Yonge Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My questions will be for the Minister of Health and Social Services. So the compliment first. Mr. Speaker, I hear the recruitment process is actually quite good. I hear that from the union. I hear that from the nurses and even the doctors. So hooray for the recruitment people. However, now the other side of the coin, I won't say what we call it, but that said, it's the other side of the compliment. I often hear that the retention problem with respect to the investment and listening to those areas of concern is lacking. So in other words, it's less good. Mr. Speaker, what can the minister do to survey both the doctors and the nurses to find out more of the creation or strengthen our retention policy so those folks don't get hired and then look at trying to leave? Thank you.
Thank you. Member from Yonge Centre. Minister of Health and Social Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I appreciate the kudos on the recruitment. That is thanks to the Department of Finance working in collaboration. They lead this area. And the work that's being done within the Health Authority, there is the strategic planning that is going on right now with the new recruit and retention policy that's going on, and that will be released, I think, this spring. I don't have the exact details or time. And within each authority, what we've been doing right now is we've been doing the town halls. We just most recently completed 3 regions in NTHSSA, and we completed Clecho. We've completed Hay River. We've got the Beaufort Delta and Sawtooth and Yellowknife region still to hear from, and that is with senior leadership. And from that work, we'll also add to the direction into management as to what more needs to be done at the frontline level. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister of Health and Social Services. Member from Yonge Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hear Williams Lake, BC, a small little town in the middle of the province of BC, gets lots of doctors and medical support people. And why? Because their recruitment and retention people cater to the needs of these particular people. Mr. Speaker, I'm talking specifically about it just once we hire you, you're left alone. We can't have that attitude. Mr. Speaker, is there any way that the minister can do a survey through the Medical Association and the Nursing Association to find out what is it the nurses and the doctors need to ensure that their field is either they're part of the community, their work's recognized, or even the changing of the nature of the industry is such that needs aren't currently being met? Thank you.
Thank you, member from Yonge Centre. Minister of Health and Social Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in the discussions that I'm having with NTHSSA and the public administrator, this is some of the work that I would be expecting them to do. I know that the public administrator has met with the Medical Association. I know that they are scheduled to meet with CAN. I know that, that there is ongoing work that he takes part in the town halls hearing from frontline staff. He works directly with NTHSSA. With the PA for Hay River, the work that they're doing, as well as the Tlicho. That there is a lot of work that is going on. Listening to, and it's not to be that there isn't work going on. That work is continuing to go on. And at this time, across every region, we're all struggling. We're all struggling where we're working. When we talk about a lot of the nurses going into the small communities, there's just not a lot of nurses going back to those communities to live and work. So what we're struggling with is the turnaround is not necessarily long-term nurses. The nurses that have been around are retiring. We've got a lot of retiring staff within the health field that are leaving small communities, and now it's ending up being a lot of locum staff having to fill those gaps. So we're working with each region, and I think that's the work that I've left within the PA of both health authorities, and Clecho is doing a lot of that work at the ground level. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister of Health and Social Services. Final supplementary. Member from Yonge Centre.
Very quickly, Mr. Speaker, I'm not here to tell the minister how to bargain. However, for years, the nurses, for example, have been asking for shift premiums and labor market supplements. Mr. Speaker, if they provide proposals, will the minister carry that like a football all the way through FMB and score a touchdown with that industry and show them you care and you're fighting for them? Thank you.
Member from Yonge Centre. Minister of Health and Social Services.
Mr. Speaker, I do not sit at the bargaining table when the collective agreements are being negotiated. There is a team that does that. However, health does carry that football and brings it over as part of all of those things that they're hearing from their staff. And I think that when the member relates to different regions in different provinces, we have to bargain with, we can only do what we can do within our collective agreement, and that agreement now is a new agreement that we have to follow for the next, I think it is till 2027. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister of Health and Social Services. Oral questions, Mr. Clerk.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Pursuant to Rule 7.27, I received follow-up information for oral question 491-20(1), eviction notices issued during the winter, asked on February 12, 2025 by the member for Detroit to the minister responsible for the Housing Northwest Territories.
Colleagues, our time for oral questions is up. Oral questions, written questions, written questions. Returns to written questions, returns to written questions. Applies to the Commissioner's address, applies to the Commissioner's address. Petitions, reports of committee on the review of bills, reports of committee on the review of bills, reports on standing and special committees, reports on standing and special committee, tabling of documents. Minister of Justice.
Mr. Speaker, I wish to table the following two documents: plain language summary for Bill 22 Legislation Act and a statement of consistency for Bill 22, Legislation Act. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister of Justice. Tabling the documents. Minister responsible for Public Utility Board.
Mr. Speaker, I wish to table the following document, Northwest Territories Public Utilities Board 2024 Annual Report. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister responsible for the Public Utilities Board. Tabling the documents. Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, I wish to table the following document, interactivity transfers exceeding $250,000 from April 1st to December 31st of 2024. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister of Finance. Tabling the documents. Tabling the documents. Notice of motions. Notice of motions. 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 Notice of motions for first reading the bills. Notice of motions first reading the bills. First reading the bills. Minister of Justice.
Mr. Speaker, I wish to present to the House Bill 23, an act to amend the Children's Law Act, to be read for the first time. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister of Justice. Pursuant to Rule 8.2, brackets 3, Bill 23 is deemed to have first reading and is ready for second readings. First reading the bills, Minister of Justice.
Mr. Speaker, I wish to present to the House Bill 24, an act to amend the Family Law Act, to be read for the first time. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister of Justice. Pursuant to Rule 8.2, brackets 3, Bill 24 is deemed to have first reading and is ready for second reading. First reading of the bills, first reading of the bills. Second reading of the bills. Minister of Justice.
Mr. Speaker, I move, seconded by the Honourable Member for Yellowknife South, that Bill 22, Legislation Act, be read for the second time. The proposed Legislation Act sets out comprehensive rules about the processes for enacting, certifying, and publishing laws in the Northwest Territories and for ensuring laws remain up to date. This will consolidate existing provisions about these processes that are found separately in several statutes and will update and modernize current practices. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister, the motion is in order to the principle of the bill. Question has been called. All those in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? Motion passed. Second reading bills, second reading of bills. Consideration in committee of the whole of bills and other matters, table document 275-20, brackets 1, with the member from Tune-a-Day-Willity in the chair.
Thank you. I now call the committee of the whole to order. What is the wish of the committee? I'm going to go to the member from Nivea-Boot Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, the committee wishes to consider table document 275-20, brackets 1, 2025-2026 main estimates, Departments of Education, Culture and Employment, and Department of Finance. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Does the committee agree? Okay, thank you. We'll take a 10-minute break. Consideration Committee of the Whole of Bills and Other Matters 2025-2026 main estimates. Conclusion of Department of Education, Culture, Employment, and Department of Finance. Born and concurrence Committee, we have agreed to consider table documents 275-20 brackets 1, 2025-2026 main estimates. We will consider the departmental totals for the Department of Education, Culture, Employment, and Finance, which we previously deferred. We will then consider the borrowing plan for the government reporting entity and establish borrowing limits for the government of Northwest Territories. Does the Minister of Finance have any opening remarks?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, Mr. Chair, as we conclude deliberations on the 25-26 main estimates, I wanted to recognize the work of members in shaping this budget, and through collaboration note that we are making additional strategic investments that reflect the priority of this Assembly and the needs of Northerners. One of the most significant outcomes of our discussions, Mr. Chair, is that there is a commitment here being made to support housing. We will be introducing a $41.6 million supplementary appropriation for Housing Northwest Territories in 25-26 in order to make critical investments in public housing. This funding responds directly to the priorities set by the 20th Legislative Assembly to improve suitability, accessibility, and affordability of housing across the Northwest Territories. In addition, we are committing a total of $50 million per year for the next 2 years, ensuring a long-term and sustainable plan to help modernize and replace aging public housing. In making this commitment, we are cognizant that we're living at a time where businesses are worried in a climate of tariffs, tariff threats, and financial uncertainty. Housing Northwest Territories already has innovative partnerships with Northwest Territories Indigenous governments and businesses, and this commitment can help deepen and build upon them. This 3-year commitment thus supports a plan that we believe can be delivered by Northerners, for Northerners, by Northerners. We are also addressing concerns that have been raised about elders in public housing, and Housing Northwest Territories will develop a strategy and a policy to forgive arrears and stop garnishment of elders, ensuring that this is in place before the 25-26 debt forgiveness period. Additionally, we will be restoring $100,000 in funding for the 25-26 for the Family Violence Shelter Network. And I would note that in accordance with its new role as the GNWT lead for non-government organization support, this funding will move over to the Department of Executive and Indigenous Affairs. Over 2025-26, EIA will be engaging other non-government organizations and Indigenous organizations in order to explore how to best align available funding to address the needs of vulnerable populations, including those experiencing intimate partner violence. On the issue of community learning centers, Mr. Chair, we all acknowledge that CLC facilities have been important hubs for education, for training, and for community-based programs. And the Minister of EC&E has committed to working with Indigenous governments and community organizations to ensure that residents will continue to have access to quality adult education and employment programs, building off the successes of individual communities may have seen with the existing CLC programs. And a timeline for this work will be provided before the end of the May sitting. I'll speak further at a further opportunity upon the occasion of an appropriation bill being introduced about the process of concluding this budget and on broader direction that we are now taking with these changes. But for now, Mr. Chair, I do want to thank members for their contributions. This budget is, again, a product of the consensus process, and together we are advancing these meaningful investments for the Northwest Territories. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. I'm going to go to the member from Nunavut Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the Minister for her comments. Mr. Chair, at this time, I'd like to move that consideration of table document 275,
Okay, thank you. I'll go back to the member from Nunavut Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I apologize. I was getting ahead of myself, as we often do. Mr. Chair, I'd like to again thank certainly thank the members of AOC. I mean, it's been an interesting couple of weeks for sure as we've deliberated on this budget and negotiated on this budget. And as the Minister said, I'll certainly speak more to it once we have the main estimates in front of committee tomorrow. I would like, again, thank members of AOC for the direction, for certainly working collaboratively to work towards our common goal, and thank Cabinet for their support as well. The housing funding that the Minister spoke of certainly is no small ask, and I think we all recognize in this House the importance of that priority to this government. We've been saying it for the past year. Housing is likely our #1 priority, and to see this kind of a commitment going forward in this year's budget, coming back on a supplemental appropriation of $41 million to add to the additional funding that housing has already budgeted, I think will put us, Mr. Chair, up to, upwards of $50 million this year alone, with anticipating more funding coming in the next 2 years as we go through the budget. Through our capital budgeting process for even more housing and certainly addressing that important need. So for now, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chair, I'd like to again thank my colleagues, thank the Minister of Finance for her time, and we'll leave it at that until tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you. Does the committee agree to proceed to the detail contained in the table documents? Committee? Thank you. Committee, we will start with the Department of Education, Culture and Employment. Please turn to the Department Summary found on page 29, Revenue Summary Information Items on page 30 and 31. Are there any questions? Seeing no further questions, Committee, I will now call the Department Summary, Education, Culture and Employment Operational Expenditures, Total Department 2025-2026 Main Estimates, $403,245,000. Does committee agree? Thank you. Committee will now move to the Department of Finance. Please turn to the departmental summary found on page 159 with information items on page 160 to 161. Are there any questions? Seeing no further questions, Committee, I will now call the Department Summary, Finance Operation Expenditures Total Department of 2025-2026 Main Estimates, $407,895,000. Does committee agree? Thank you, committee. The borrowing plan is separate from the estimates but required by the Financial Administration Act to be presented with the estimates. Further, the borrowing outline in the plan will be included in the subsequent Appropriation Act that is presented to the Assembly. Please turn to page 17 to find the borrowing plan from the government reporting entity established borrowing limits for the government of Northwest Territories. Are there any questions? Seeing no further questions, I will now call on this page the borrowing plan for the government reporting entity and established borrowing limit for the government of Northwest Territories. The total considered borrowing limit is $1,722,122,000. Does the committee agree? Thank you, committee. Does the committee agree that it is and has concluded the consideration of table documents 275-20 brackets 1, 2025-2026 main estimates? Does the committee agree? Thank you. The members, I want to go to the member from the Newfoundland Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Now that we've all caught up, Mr. Chair, I move that consideration of table document 275-20 brackets 1, 2025-2026 main estimates be now concluded, and that table document 275-20 brackets 1 be reported and recommended as ready for further consideration in formal session through the form of an appropriation bill. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Committee, this concludes our consideration of table documents. Thank you to the minister. Oh, sorry. Oh, sorry about that. Thank you. The motion is in order. To the motion. Question has been called. All those in favor? Against? Motion carried. We'll go to the member from the Nunavut Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move the chair rise and report progress.
The motion is in order. The motion is non-debatable. Oh, sorry. Okay. I will now rise and report progress. Thank you. Okay. Thank you. The motion is in order. The motion is non-debatable. All those in favor? All those opposed? The motion is carried. I will now rise and report progress. Thank you.
Tuna de Willity.
Mr. Speaker, your committee has been considering table documents 275-20 brackets 1 and would like to report progress 1. Motion carried. Consider table documents 275-20 brackets 1 is concluded and the House concur in those estimates and as amended, and that appropriation bill to be based thereon to be introduced without delay. And Mr. Speaker, I move that the report of the committee of the whole be concurred with. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Tuna de Willity. Can I have a seconder, please? Member from the Nutwood. All those in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carried. Third reading of bill, third reading of bills. Orders of the day, Mr. Clerk.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Orders of the day for Thursday, March 12, 2025 at 1:30 p.m. Prayer reflection, minister statements, member statements, motions. Motion 51-20 bracket 1, motion 52-20 bracket 1, and motion 54-20 bracket 1. 5. Returns to oral questions. Oral question 530, oral question 607, oral question 645. Recognition of visitors in the gallery. Acknowledgements. Oral questions, returns to written questions, written question 14-20 bracket 1. Replies to the Commissioner's address. Petitions. Reports of committees on the review of bills, reports of standing and special committees, tabling of documents, notices of motion for first reading of bills, second reading of bills, Bill 23, Bill 24, consideration in Committee of the Whole of bills and other matters, report of Committee of the Whole, third reading of bills, orders of the day. Merci, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. This House stands adjourned until Thursday, March 13th, 2025 at 1:30 p.m.